What if something you legally owned yesterday could turn you into a criminal today, without a warning, without a knock, without a second chance? California just expanded its gun bans again, and most people have no idea how far they go. This isn't just about assault weapons anymore. It's about attachments, magazines, and even items people don't realize are regulated. Some of these changes affect first-time buyers. Others impact long-time gun owners. And one rule can apply even if you don't own a gun at all. Stay until the end, because reason number 10 surprises almost everyone.
Number 1. Rising mass shooting concerns. Rising mass shooting concerns have become the strongest justification behind California's expanding gun bans. Lawmakers argue that modern attacks are not random events, but foreseeable outcomes when high-powered firearms are easily accessible. Research cited in hearings shows incidents involving rapid-fire weapons produce higher casualty numbers, shorter response windows, and overwhelming chaos for first responders. These events often unfold in schools, malls, and everyday public spaces, making the threat feel immediate and personal. By emphasizing prevention, officials frame restrictions as protective measures designed to reduce exposure to worst-case scenarios rather than punish responsible ownership. This narrative strongly influences public opinion and legislative urgency across urban and suburban districts statewide during election cycles annually. From a policy perspective, legislators focus less on intent and more on potential harm per minute. Studies referenced by the state suggest that increased weapon lethality reduces survival rates even with fast emergency response. The argument centers on limiting damage when prevention fails. Officials often compare firearm restrictions to automobile safety standards, where speed limits, airbags, and design rules exist to reduce fatalities rather than eliminate accidents. By restricting certain firearms, lawmakers believe they can lower the scale of injury, trauma, and long-term community impact following violent incidents. This approach prioritizes population-level safety metrics over individual preference, emphasizing collective risk management during unpredictable moments of crisis that strain medical and emergency systems statewide. For everyday residents, this reasoning reshapes what legal ownership means in practice. Firearms that look ordinary or are common in other states may now be labeled unacceptable risks in California. Responsible owners often feel targeted despite compliance and training. The state's stance is clear. Personal responsibility does not outweigh population-level danger. This explains why bans continue expanding regardless of crime trends. Policy is driven by worst-case scenarios rather than typical usage. Understanding this framework helps viewers grasp why regulations tighten even when threats feel distant from daily life. It reflects a precautionary philosophy that values reducing rare catastrophic outcomes over preserving broader consumer choice within high-density population environments like cities statewide.
Number 2. Rapid-fire capabilities and rate of damage. Rapid-fire capability is a major concern driving California's expanding restrictions. Lawmakers focus on how quickly a firearm can discharge rounds, arguing that speed multiplies harm. Even when two weapons fire the same ammunition, the one capable of firing faster can produce more injuries in less time, leaving victims and responders with fewer chances to intervene. Officials emphasize that seconds matter in violent encounters, especially in crowded public spaces. This concern shifts attention away from how often guns are used legally and toward how devastating they can be when misused. The faster a weapon can operate, the harder it becomes for bystanders, law enforcement, and medical teams to limit damage once violence begins. From a research standpoint, policymakers reference studies showing that higher rates of fire correlate with increased casualty severity, not just frequency. The issue is not only fully automatic weapons, which are already restricted, but also firearms and accessories that simulate rapid firing through mechanical or ergonomic advantages. Legislators argue these features blur the line between civilian firearms and military-style efficiency. Their position is that when a weapon allows sustained fire with minimal interruption, it increases fatal outcomes, even if accuracy decreases. California's approach treats rate of fire as a public safety variable, similar to how speed limits regulate vehicles capable of extreme performance on public roads. For gun owners, this focus creates confusion because many rapid-fire features appear subtle or cosmetic. A grip angle, trigger system, or internal component may not seem dangerous on its own, yet it can change how the law classifies the firearm. The state argues that intent does not matter as much as capability. If a feature increases firing speed, it increases risk exposure for everyone nearby. This mindset explains why regulations often quietly expand, targeting function over appearance. Understanding this helps viewers see why something small can suddenly become illegal under evolving definitions of rate-based risk in densely populated environments.
Number 3. Increased risk for law enforcement and first responders. Law enforcement agencies play a major role in shaping California's expanding gun bans, especially when officer safety is involved. Officials argue that encounters involving highly capable firearms escalate faster and leave less room for de-escalation. When officers respond to a call, uncertainty already dominates the situation. The presence of weapons with enhanced power or rapid engagement potential increases the danger before officers can even assess intent. Policymakers emphasize that these risks extend beyond police to paramedics and firefighters, who often enter scenes that are still unstable. Reducing access to firearms deemed especially dangerous is framed as a way to lower the baseline threat level faced by first responders every single day. From a policy and training perspective, agencies report that complex or modified firearms complicate split-second decision-making. Officers must identify weapon type, capability, and potential modifications almost instantly, often in poor lighting or chaotic environments. Research cited in legislative discussions suggests that uncertainty increases the likelihood of mistakes, injuries, and fatal outcomes for everyone involved. California lawmakers argue that simpler, more restrictive firearm categories make enforcement clearer and safer. By narrowing what is legally allowed, they believe officers can respond with greater confidence and consistency. This approach prioritizes predictability, reducing the number of variables officers must process during high-stress encounters. For civilians, this reasoning can feel disconnected from everyday reality, especially for those who have never interacted with law enforcement under stress. Responsible owners may feel unfairly grouped with dangerous scenarios they would never create. However, the state's position centers on system-wide safety, not individual behavior. Laws are designed around worst-case encounters, not typical interactions. If a firearm increases the danger during a rare but critical moment, lawmakers argue it justifies restriction. Understanding this helps explain why bans often expand in ways that seem excessive. They're shaped by emergency response realities, where hesitation, confusion, or misjudgment can permanently alter lives in seconds.
Number 4. Ghost guns and untraceable firearms. Ghost guns have become a central concern in California's expanding gun bans because they bypass one of the state's most relied-upon tools, traceability. Lawmakers argue that firearms without serial numbers undermine investigations, accountability, and deterrence. When a gun cannot be traced to a manufacturer or purchaser, it becomes nearly impossible for authorities to track crime patterns, trafficking routes, or repeat offenders. Officials point to data showing sharp increases in unserialized firearms recovered at crime scenes, especially in urban areas. This fuels the belief that easy-to-assemble kits and parts transform regulation into guesswork, weakening the entire enforcement system designed to protect the public. From a research and enforcement angle, untraceable weapons are viewed as a multiplier problem. One ghost gun can be reused, resold, or transferred without leaving a paper trail, making it attractive to people who want to avoid background checks or legal scrutiny. California policymakers emphasize that the issue is not hobbyists alone, but scalability. When parts can be ordered online and assembled quickly, regulation loses effectiveness. Studies cited in hearings suggest that traceability plays a key role in crime resolution rates and intervention strategies. Without serial numbers, investigators lose critical leads that often prevent future violence, not just solve past crimes. For everyday residents, Ghost gun laws can feel intrusive, especially for those interested in DIY projects or firearm customization. Many are surprised to learn that owning certain parts, not just complete weapons, can now trigger legal consequences. The state's stance is that function outweighs form. If a collection of parts can become a working firearm, it is treated as one. This philosophy explains why bans extend to components, kits, and unfinished frames. Understanding this helps viewers see why California targets untraceable weapons so aggressively. The focus is on preserving system-wide accountability, even if it restricts activities that once seemed harmless or purely recreational.
Number 5. High-capacity magazines and sustained fire. High-capacity magazines are a major target of California's expanded gun bans because lawmakers believe ammunition volume directly influences harm. The argument is simple but powerful. More rounds without reloading means longer, uninterrupted firing, fewer pauses, and greater danger to people nearby. Studies frequently cited by the state show that moments when an attacker reloads often create opportunities for escape, intervention, or disruption. By limiting magazine capacity, officials aim to reintroduce those critical breaks. This issue resonates strongly with the public because magazine limits are framed as a way to reduce casualty escalation rather than ban firearms outright, making the restriction appear more narrowly focused and preventative. From a policy standpoint, lawmakers emphasize that magazine size has little impact on lawful activities like home defense or sports shooting, but a large impact during violent incidents. Research referenced in legislative debates suggests that incidents involving high-capacity magazines result in more injuries per event, even when the number of incidents remains unchanged. California treats magazine capacity as a force multiplier, where more ammunition increases the potential damage without increasing accuracy or control. By regulating magazines rather than firearms alone, the state attempts to address lethality mechanics that operate independently of shooter intent. This approach allows lawmakers to argue they are targeting outcomes, not ownership culture or identity. For gun owners, these rules often feel arbitrary because magazines are seen as accessories, not weapons. Many people legally purchased them years ago and stored them responsibly. However, California law prioritizes present risk, not past legality. Possession itself can carry consequences, regardless of how or where the magazine is used. This creates frustration and confusion, especially when magazines look identical except for internal capacity. The state's message is consistent. Capability matters more than appearance. Understanding this reasoning explains why enforcement focuses on round count, even when behavior remains unchanged. It reflects a belief that reducing sustained fire potential lowers harm during rare but devastating events.
Number 6. Firearm modifications and closing legal loopholes. Firearm modifications are a growing focus of California's gun bans because lawmakers believe small changes can defeat large laws. Officials argue that even when a firearm is technically legal, certain alterations can dramatically increase its effectiveness, concealability, or rate of fire. From adjustable stocks to trigger components, these modifications may appear minor, yet they can change how a weapon performs in real-world situations. Legislators frame this as a loophole problem, where laws aimed at safety are weakened by aftermarket parts that reintroduce restricted capabilities through indirect means. Closing these gaps has become a priority to maintain the integrity of existing regulations. From a research and enforcement perspective, modified firearms complicate both classification and accountability. A weapon that begins as compliant can become illegal through a single added component, creating confusion for owners and challenges for police. Studies cited in policy debates suggest that modified firearms are more likely to be used in criminal activity because they offer enhanced performance without requiring a fully illegal purchase. California lawmakers argue that regulation must evolve alongside innovation. If laws only address factory components, they quickly become outdated. By restricting specific modifications, the state attempts to regulate function, not branding, keeping pace with rapidly changing firearm technology. For everyday gun owners, this approach often feels unpredictable and restrictive. Many modifications are marketed as comfort upgrades or ergonomic improvements, not safety risks. Owners may not realize that installing a part can instantly reclassify their firearm under state law. California's stance is that intent is irrelevant when outcomes can change. If a modification increases risk during a violent encounter, it becomes subject to restriction. This philosophy explains why bans increasingly target components rather than complete firearms. Understanding this helps viewers recognize that compliance now requires more than owning a legal gun. It requires constant awareness of how every modification affects legality in a tightly regulated environment.
Number 7. Domestic violence and immediate risk prevention. Domestic violence is one of the most emotionally charged reasons behind California's expanding gun bans. Lawmakers point to research showing that the presence of a firearm in a volatile household dramatically increases the risk of fatal outcomes, especially for women and children. Unlike random acts of violence, domestic incidents often involve known individuals, escalating tensions, and moments of emotional crisis. Officials argue that restricting access to certain firearms during these periods is a preventative measure, not a judgment of character. The goal is to reduce the likelihood that an argument, threat, or moment of fear turns into an irreversible tragedy inside the home. From a policy standpoint, California relies heavily on data linking firearm access with domestic homicide rates. Studies cited in legislative debates indicate that when guns are readily available, the chance of death during domestic disputes increases significantly compared to other weapons. This has led lawmakers to support temporary confiscation, firearm prohibitions tied to restraining orders, and expanded definitions of prohibited possession. The emphasis is on time and distance. By creating barriers between individuals in crisis and lethal tools, the state believes it can lower fatality rates while allowing space for intervention, counseling, or legal resolution before violence escalates further. For many residents, these laws feel uncomfortable because they can apply before any crime occurs. Responsible owners may fear being affected by accusations or legal actions they believe are unfair. California's response is that domestic violence prevention requires early intervention, not reaction after harm is done. The law prioritizes risk indicators over proven intent. If a situation shows elevated danger, access is restricted temporarily or permanently, depending on circumstances. Understanding this reasoning explains why gun bans extend into private spaces and personal relationships. The focus is not punishment, but reducing the chance that emotional volatility and lethal access intersect during the most dangerous moments.
Number 8. Suicide prevention and impulsive decisions. Suicide prevention plays a significant role in California's expanding gun bans, even though it receives less public attention than crime. Lawmakers point to research showing that many suicide attempts are impulsive, occurring during short periods of intense emotional distress. Firearms are uniquely dangerous in these moments because they have an extremely high fatality rate compared to other methods. Officials argue that limiting access to certain firearms or components during crisis periods can save lives by creating time barriers. The focus is not on long-term intent, but on preventing irreversible decisions made in minutes of despair that families and communities live with forever. From a scientific perspective, studies consistently show that access matters more than mindset alone. People who survive a suicide attempt often do not go on to die by suicide later, suggesting that interruption works. California lawmakers use this data to justify policies such as waiting periods, temporary prohibitions, and restrictions on easily usable firearms. The idea is simple. Reducing immediate access lowers fatal outcomes without permanently removing rights in every case. Firearms are treated as a risk amplifier during mental health crises. By reducing speed and availability, the state believes it can decrease suicide deaths while encouraging intervention and support before tragedy occurs. For many gun owners, this reasoning feels deeply personal and uncomfortable. They may view restrictions as an assumption of mental instability or a lack of trust. California's position emphasizes public health, not moral judgment. Laws are designed around statistical patterns, not individual character. If a tool dramatically increases the chance of death during a temporary crisis, lawmakers argue it warrants regulation. Understanding this explains why gun policy increasingly overlaps with mental health frameworks. The focus is on preventing loss during brief moments of vulnerability when access to lethal means can permanently end a life that might otherwise have continued.
Number 9. Interstate gun trafficking and supply chains. Interstate gun trafficking is a major reason California continues expanding its gun bans. Lawmakers argue that strict state laws are undermined when firearms flow in from states with looser regulations. Guns legally purchased elsewhere can be trafficked into California and resold on the illegal market, fueling violence without passing through state safeguards. Officials describe this as a supply chain problem, not an isolated crime issue. When prohibited firearms remain widely available across state lines, local bans lose effectiveness. This concern resonates because it frames gun violence as a systemic issue, where actions outside California's borders directly impact safety inside its communities. From a policy perspective, legislators rely on crime gun tracing data showing that a significant portion of firearms recovered in California crimes originate out of state. These weapons often bypass background checks, waiting periods, and registration requirements. California responds by tightening definitions of what can be legally owned, hoping to reduce demand as well as circulation. By making certain firearms and components illegal to possess at all, the state aims to shrink the resale market that traffickers exploit. Lawmakers compare this approach to controlling illegal drugs or hazardous materials, where reducing availability is seen as essential to limiting harm, even when enforcement cannot catch every transfer. For residents, this reasoning can feel unfair because local owners are affected by actions happening hundreds of miles away. Responsible buyers who follow every rule may still face restrictions designed to counter external threats. California's stance is that state safety cannot be separated from national movement. If a weapon type is commonly trafficked and linked to crime, possession itself becomes a risk factor. Understanding this helps explain why bans sometimes appear disconnected from local behavior. They are designed to disrupt regional pipelines, not just individual choices, prioritizing collective security over isolated compliance in a highly interconnected national market. Number 10. Legal simplicity and zero-tolerance enforcement. Legal simplicity is one of the most overlooked reasons behind California's expanding gun bans. Lawmakers argue that complex laws create weak enforcement, loopholes, and inconsistent outcomes. When rules rely on subjective interpretation, cases fall apart, charges are dismissed, and prohibited items remain in circulation. Officials believe clear, yes or no bans are easier for everyone to understand, enforce, and comply with. This zero-tolerance approach reduces ambiguity for law enforcement, courts, and the public. Instead of debating intent or context, authorities can focus on possession alone, which streamlines enforcement and reduces legal disputes that consume time and resources statewide. From a policy standpoint, legislators view ambiguity as a safety risk. If officers must analyze weapon configurations in real time, mistakes increase. Research cited in hearings shows that unclear laws lead to uneven enforcement, disproportionately affecting some communities while allowing others to slip through unnoticed. California's response is to eliminate gray areas entirely. By expanding bans, the state creates bright-line rules that are easier to train, teach, and apply consistently. This mirrors regulatory strategies in areas like environmental protection and food safety, where strict thresholds replace judgment calls. The priority is predictability, even if that means broader restrictions that affect more people than before. For everyday residents, this reasoning can be the most surprising because it affects even those who do not actively own firearms. Inheritance, storage, transportation, or temporary possession can trigger violations under zero-tolerance laws. Something legal in another state, or legal years ago, may now carry penalties without warning. California's stance is that simplicity improves safety, even at the cost of flexibility. If a rule is easy to break accidentally, the state expects individuals to stay constantly informed. Understanding this explains why bans often expand quietly and broadly. The goal is not nuance, but maximum enforceability in a system designed to minimize exceptions.
California's expanded gun bans are not random, sudden, or isolated decisions. They are the result of a long-term strategy built around risk reduction, predictability, and population-level safety. Each reason discussed in this video connects to a broader philosophy that prioritizes limiting worst-case outcomes over preserving flexibility for individual ownership. Whether the focus is mass shootings, rapid-fire capability, law enforcement safety, or mental health crises, the pattern remains consistent. Lawmakers aim to reduce harm by restricting access to tools they believe increase danger during rare but devastating moments. Understanding this framework is essential, even for those who strongly disagree with the approach. These laws also reveal how modern regulation functions in high-density states. Policy is increasingly shaped by data trends, statistical probabilities, and system-wide outcomes, not personal stories or intent. That is why bans often feel blunt, overreaching, or disconnected from daily experience. California does not regulate based on how most people behave, but on how systems fail under extreme pressure. This explains why accessories, components, and even passive possession are now scrutinized. The state believes safety improves when ambiguity disappears, even if that simplicity reduces personal choice and flexibility for compliant owners. Whether these bans actually increase safety remains heavily debated. What is clear is that ignorance of the law carries real consequences. Staying informed is no longer optional. These regulations affect ownership, storage, transportation, and even inheritance. Understanding the reasons behind them does not require agreement, but it does provide clarity. In a legal environment that changes rapidly, awareness becomes protection, and knowledge becomes the most important tool available to everyone involved. Now, I want to hear your perspective, not just opinions, but real experiences. Drop a comment and tell us which reasons surprised you the most. If this breakdown helped, watch our previous video for deeper context. Please support our work by subscribing. It's just one click, and it truly helps us keep going.